to direct your attention to 1 Peter chapter 4. While you're getting that, let me first give honor to God, who is my entire life, to the pastor of this house in his absence, Pastor Brown, for the opportunity to stand before you this morning, to my pastor, the Reverend Napoleon J. Harris V, proud pastor of First Baptist Church, South Inglewood, to all of my co-laborers in ministry, to all of you that are blessed to be here, the Crossroads Young Adult Ministry, all of the familiar faces I see in the room, I am just glad and honored to stand before you this morning. 1 Peter chapter 4, commencing at verse 7, and I read from the New International Version. It says, "The end of all things is near. Therefore be alert and sober mind, so that you may pray. Above all, love each other deeply, because love covers a multitude of sins." This morning I want to leave with you a thought looking through the lens of love. You may be seated. Looking through the lens of love. And I promise I won't be before you long. I know that's the number one lie told in the church from the pulpit. But I promise you, if you wait until the end to say amen, you're going to miss it. Looking through the lens of love. You know, there's a phrase I've heard since childhood, but I think it rings true more so now than in any other point in my lifetime. And that is, we are indeed living in perilous times. On a global scale, terrorism is so widespread that as soon as we change our little Facebook profile picture to stand in solidarity with one group, another violent attack breaks out somewhere else. Here in the United States, we deal with the continued and commonplace killing of black and brown persons for trivial offenses or for no reason at all. And we deal with the retaliation from the oppressed who are fed up with systematic injustice, who have lost hope in our government and decide to take matters into their own hands. The circus, also known as our political system, has decided that the best and most qualified candidates to lead our country are between a deceitful circumnavigator of the law who doesn't know how to properly send an email and an overtly racist and offensive failure of a businessman whose wife, by the way, apparently never heard of a little thing called plagiarism. Our nation is divided. Blacks versus cops, gay versus straight, Republican versus Democrat, citizen and immigrant, Christian versus Muslim, Kojic versus PAW, Presbyterian versus Methodist, Missionary Baptist, Primitive Baptist. We are sure enough living in divisive, tumultuous, and perilous times. This makes it a little easier for us to situate ourselves within the context of this passage. In verse 7, the pseudonymous author Peter sets our text amidst trying and difficult times, probably during a period of economic hardship, persecution of Christians, and direct oppression from the Roman authority. Does any of this sound familiar? Simply put, the author shared the same view as my grandmama and them, saying, we living in the last days, and Jesus is on his way back. However, the text offers important and valuable instruction on how Christians should conduct themselves in times of turmoil. Firstly, we have to change our mindset. Say, change your mindset. We have to have the right mindset. The author admonishes us to be sober-minded and disciplined. Now, at first glance and on the surface, This text is telling us that we shouldn't drink too much because it impairs our judgment and causes us to make poor decisions. I know we got a few amens in here. We've all won't let that alone. But also the call for sober-mindedness means that we are not to become so consumed with what's going on in the world that we cannot and do not think clearly. We cannot allow our emotions to rise above reason and cause us to do things we ought not to do. Cannot become so engulfed with our own agendas and our own desires or fleshly desires that we become oblivious to what's going on around us and the fact that we are indeed in trouble, counted as sheep for the slaughter. In other words, the author is just simply saying, get your mind right, because we have work to do. Must have discipline in order to pray effectively and fervently in times of trouble without ceasing. Now, this doesn't mean we have to ask to be excused every 2 hours to go to the storage room, roll out a prayer mat, light a candle, put on a coat of many colors, say the most eloquent and elaborate prayer you can pray. Rather, our goal should be to keep our minds clear and guarded so that we are always ready to hear from God when God speaks. Our connection with God should be so strong that we're always ready to hear from God, and we receive divine messages anywhere, anyhow, and at any time, at church, at home, in the car, in the park, on the job, or on the commode, wherever we may be. God should be able to speak to us clearly. We can't hear from God clearly if we're always drunk or high or overly emotional. We can't hear from God clearly if we're too busy chasing paper, chasing skirts, or chasing other people's husbands. I know that doesn't go on over here. Instead, we should recall the words of brothers Devon Murphy and Vashawn Mitchell and chase after God. A sober mind allows us to ponder a very important question, one that I've asked myself quite a bit here lately. And that is, how can we maintain hope in a seemingly hopeless world? Better yet, I've had to ask, how can I preach hope when it seems that all hope is lost? Now, the typical and cliche answer is, well, we just gotta pray. We gotta pray. Don't get me wrong. I believe in the power of prayer. Prayer works. But I have a slightly different perspective on prayer than most. You see, from my observation, we tend to treat praying to God like writing in a diary, where we just kind of get things off our chest and then just write our hopes for the future. Or for some of us, praying to God is like playing the numbers. We make our play and hope we hit big. Prayer is not a one-way method of communication to God, but it is a two-way method of communicating with God. Jeremiah 33:3 declares that if we call upon God, when we pray to God, God will, not might, not sometimes, will answer. But it is up to us to determine what we will do with the answer. So in the wake of the shooting at Pulse nightclub in Orlando, the killings of Alton Sterling and Philando Castile, the police officers attacked in Dallas and Baton Rouge, as well as the embarrassment of a political race going on right now, in the midst of perceived darkness, despair, destruction, desolation, dehumanization, and devilish deeds, our text provides us with a simple but yet complex answer of how we can have hope in a hopeless world. And that answer is just simply love one another. Love one another. That is the mindset that a Christian should have in tumultuous times. Change your mindset. Secondly, you must change your attitude. Somebody say, change your attitude. Love is the hallmark of a true Christian and the foundation of everything we do. Our theology, our doctrines, our lifestyles, and our interactions with each other should be should be, rooted and grounded in both a vertical and horizontal display of love. That is, love for God and love for each other. Our text describes a type of love known as agape love, which is unconditional and unsurpassable, the highest form of love one can display. This love supersedes the philos or brotherly love, as well as the eros or romantic love. Because this love is not contingent upon a relationship of any type, but it is reflective of God's love for all humankind that we should too embody for all of humanity. This love is unmerited, meaning that one does not have to give something in exchange for it. It is blind, meaning that it takes no concern with gender, race, nationality, religious affiliation, sexual orientation, education level, economic status, or any other societal classification. This love simply says, I love you for being a human being. This love says, I love you because you are created in the image of God. And it is this love, the author explains, that is able to cover a multitude of sin and strife in our society. Now, if you would allow me to jaywalk through this text for just a moment, I'd like to focus our attention on the latter portion of the 8th verse, where the author says that love covers a multitude of sins. Here the word cover literally means to conceal or to hide. Let us recall a passage in Genesis 9 when Noah had just a little bit too much to drink and had passed out naked in his tent. His son Ham discovered his father's rather unflattering moment, and he went out and told his brothers. Now, how many of you all know some folk like Ham who are quick to gossip and talk about everyone else's shortcomings? You know, truth be told, some of us in here like Ham. Quick to share a story on Facebook and talk about it, text about it, have parking lot conversations about it, and then say at the end, well, I'm praying for them, as if that is going to mitigate our gossiping selves. We should instead follow the example of Ham's older brothers, who instead of following up with Ham's foolishness, they turned their faces away from their father's nakedness and covered him. So when someone comes to you with dirt on your brother or sister, don't entertain them, but rather turn away. Don't go around town putting people on blast, and don't perpetuate dissension by spreading stories online via text or on Snapchat. Instead, we must learn to turn our face away from their transgression, and cover our brother or sister until they are able to get themselves together. Because we never know when we might find ourselves in a situation when we need somebody to cover us. Oh, come on now. We've all done some dirt. And back when you used to go to the club and not get tipsy, but get sloppy drunk. Remember when you would sleep with him, her, and her mama? You hoped your homie had some perk, some kush, not the cheap stuff neither. As a matter of fact, some of us don't have to think back that far, because we had some stuff covered last week, last night, this morning on the way to church. A few of us in here right now, looking good, smelling good, hair laid, face beat. Truth be told, down on the inside, we're just as filthy as can be. But the good news is we're able to come into the house of God and offer praise and worship because we've been covered. Covered. Is anybody glad they're covered on today? Because while we were yet sinners, God's love is still able to cover us. Cover. This word, cover, comes from the Greek kalypto. It's where we derive our word kleptomaniac. You know, that's a fancy word for a compulsive thief, somebody who they don't steal because they need something, they just steal because they like stealing. You Over here in the hood, we call that a crackhead. This provides us with an illustration of how we ought to cover one another, meaning that we should cover each other compulsively with urgency and for no reason at all. Love will cause us to say, I don't care what you did, I don't care what people are saying, you're my brother, you're my sister, and I love you regardless. We tend to look at people through a lens of judgment, always wanting to point out where people fall short instead of pointing out their strengths and celebrating their progress. Instead, a Christian should look through a lens of love that makes us blind to a person's imperfections and alleged transgressions, because our concern is not with what they've done, but with their well-being and relationship with Christ. And this is especially true and difficult in cases when a brother or sister offends us or does something wrong to us. Agape love will make us slow to retaliate, but quick to put on our love lens. Our text teaches us to remain sober, so instead of going to get drunk and wanting to fight, take a Beyonce spirit and get drunk in love. Let love affect the way you think, act, and react. So instead of seeing a liar and a manipulator, your love lens will show you a person with low self-esteem in need of affirmation. Instead of seeing a home wrecker, your love lens will show you a person who's been misused and abused and will do anything for affection. Instead of seeing a racist cop, your love lens will show you a fearful person who has been conditioned by society to label you and view you as a threat. When we look through a lens of carnality, we see labels, stigmas, and stereotypes. But when we look through a lens of love, we see people, although broken, in need of covering. When hate covers, we dehumanize. But when love covers, we empathize. Y'all can tweet that if you want. When hate covers, we dehumanize. But when love covers, we empathize. We have to change our attitude, how we look at people. Nextly, we have to change your outlook. Somebody say, change your outlook. This mindset and practice of covering one another in love is what can mend a society and help hold it together. And it is up to us as Christians to set the example for the rest of the world. When I cover you, you cover me, everybody's covered. And this covering is to be long-lasting. So it's not to just cover one or few sins, but a multiplicity of offenses. Jesus taught previously in Matthew 18 and 22 that we aren't grant a 70 times 7 covering, meaning we must give our brother or our sister as much time as they need to cover their nakedness and get themselves together. When we are able to forgive one another and look past each other's shortcomings, when we're able to view everyone as people created in the image of God, when we realize that we don't have a heaven or a hell to put anyone in, when we realize that we're just as messed up, screwed up, jacked up, and hacked up as everybody else, that's when we're able to move forward in love. Looking through the lens of love causes us to serve with humility and treat people with respect. Looking through the lens of love compels us to seek out opportunities to be of assistance to others. The lens of love causes us to seek reconciliation instead of retaliation. The lens of love urges us to work with the pastor and church leadership instead of bucking him and raising hell at all the time. Our love lens will create harmony instead of discord in the choir, on the usher board, in the youth group, and in the young adult ministry. Our love lens will prompt us to focus less on the splinter in our brother or sister's eye and see clearly to remove the 2x4 in our own eye. Looking through a lens of love is critically important for the Christian. because it is symbolically parallel to Christ's love for us, and it demonstrates how we must be willing to give of ourselves in order to save someone else. Jesus provided us with a perfect model for looking through the lens of love and covering one another. He did not concern himself with a person's background, past or present sins, ethnicity, or social status. No, Jesus' concern was for the well-being of all people and offering salvation from sin, salvation from death, and saving us to eternal life and citizenship in God's kingdom. I'm almost through when I say that Jesus looked through a lens of love when he told the Father, prepare me a body, and I'll go down and do your will. Jesus looked through a lens of love when he humbled himself to be born not in a luxurious palace, but in a feeding trough of a barn, proving from day one that he is indeed the bread of life and water that quenches all thirst. He looked through a lens of love when he began his ministry as a young adult and chose to kick it not with royalty and the wealthy, but with society's underprivileged and undervalued, folk like me and you. His love lens caused him to have compassion, to heal the blind, cast out demons, cleanse leprosy, and raise the dead. His love lens caused him to open a restaurant in the middle of nowhere and hold a fish fry to feed thousands of people. His love lens allowed him to give himself over to a corrupt government whose officers used excessive force to subdue, arrest, and kill an innocent, unarmed man. And he did all of this because he loved us so much, and he wanted to cover our sins. My brothers and my sisters, if you don't get anything else out of this message, I want you to know this: that when we look through a lens of love at others, Jesus sees us through the lens of Jesus' blood. When we look at others through the lens of love, God sees us through the lens of Jesus' blood. So when everyone else sees our transgression, God sees our transformation. When the world saw a sinner, God saw a saint saved by the blood of the Son. When the world saw a liar, God saw a lay member. When the world saw a cheater, God saw a choir member. When the world saw a drug dealer, God saw a deacon. When the world saw a prostitute, God saw a praise and worship leader. When the world saw a pimp, God saw a preacher and a prophet. Marvin Sapp said it best. He saw the best in me when everyone else around could only see the worst in me. And as I get ready to take my seat in a few minutes, I say today that I love you because I love Jesus. And oh, how I love Jesus because he first loved me. Is there anybody in here that's glad today that Jesus' blood covered our many mess-ups, mishaps, missteps, and mistakes? How many of you are glad that his blood reaches from the highest mountain way down to the lowest valley? I'm glad today that Jesus' blood never lost its power. I'm glad today that Jesus' blood never lost its power. I'm glad the blood was able to save me. I'm glad his blood was able to change me. I'm glad that his blood was able to keep me and heal me and deliver me. I'm so glad that Jesus' blood is covering me right now. Is there anybody in here that's in need of covering? Is there anybody in here that's in need of healing, financial breakthrough, peace in your home, peace on your job, increase in every aspect of your life? I tell you today that Jesus' blood still covers and it still works to this very hour. And that's good news today. That's shouting good news today. that's shouting good news today, because I'm so glad that Jesus' blood saved me from a world of sin. When I was out doing everything and anything that I was bad enough to do, God snatched me up and brought me in. He took me out of the muck and the mire, and he put me on a rock to stay. I'm glad today that Jesus' blood, it still covers. So if there's anybody out there today that you're in need of a relationship with God, you're saying to yourself, brother, you don't know what I've done. You don't know what I've been through. But I'm here to tell you today that Jesus' blood has all power. Power to deliver you, power to save you, power to bring you out, and power to bring you through. All you've got to do is turn it over. All you've got to do is turn it over. Turn it over. Turn it over to Jesus, and he'll make everything. He'll make everything. He'll make everything. Everything. He'll make it all right. And I'm glad about it today. I'm glad about it today. That Jesus, Jesus' blood covered me.